maybe asking questions, exactly like in this webinar, and what that's going to look like. And you are also getting to know more about yourself. Oftentimes when we start putting together data, and it could be quantitative or qualitative, it's an overview of who you are. And when we've had some people make these tags, they all of a sudden will say things like, wow, I didn't realize I have all these different qualities about myself. So it's really helpful to get just a big picture view of who you are, why you're involved in leadership, and what kind of leader you are. So then we share, who we are in, whether it's virtual or physical, in a physical room. And then we start talking about the training and how there are parts of the training that will affect you as a leader. We also tie into the iLead program the problem-based learning principles. So we give some real life experiences so that folks in the audience can apply what they know and what they've learned and how to lead in some of those real life experiences. And it could be tied to previous leaders and looking at the history of those leaders. It could be looking into the future and how are we going to grow some of these principles. But there are different parts of the training that we really love to anticipate as far as trying to get folks to learn more about themselves. And then, of course, you want to look at the interconnectedness of problem-based learning and how the iLead 21 interweaves with those pieces. And that can be through learning about your leadership, the iLead principles, which we'll talk about, those 5 iLead principles, and then really loving what you're doing. Because as a leader, that's where you need to be. You need to be loving who you're leading, what you're leading, and how you're going about those leadership skills. And then there's a network that we have. We have a Ning site, and we've just recently added a platform using the Oboverse platform where we have different schools right now and different companies actually interweaving and talking with each other about how they're growing leadership in their organizations. And it's been a beautiful thing because we've had those different groups talking to one another. In particular, right now, we have a bunch of different organizations in India that we're working with, and they have not only reached out across their own continent, or country, excuse me, not continent, throughout India, but they've also reached out to some of the organizations we're working with here in the United States. We've got some different school systems in Alabama, Montana, Alaska, Connecticut, New Hampshire, West Virginia, and Virginia who are using iLead, and we've just started a big group in Alabama, and so they're reaching out and learning what leadership looks like in their particular locality. And that's been fascinating because the students, the adults have seen that there are some common pieces around leadership even outside of their own continent. And then there are some very big differences. There's some struggles that we deal with within our communities. There are some strengths that we want to share about and brag about. And then the coaches blog about those pieces in the Ning, which I will show you after this presentation. So today what I want to share with you is just how an agenda would look at the beginning of a training and walk you through those pieces. And this is really just an overview of iLead. And I talked about the problem-based learning and leadership overview. I'm going to share with you the 5 iLead leadership principles. And then the big picture. We have 3 different actually books that we've written. The first one is The Novice Leader. And Rebecca Edwards wrote all 3 of these books with her husband, Dr. Steve Edwards. And then the second book is The Emerging Leader, and the third one is The Practicing Leader. So I'll take you through the first 2 pieces of the Novice and the Emerging. And the Practicing Leader is a work that's in place and in progress right now. And then we'll look at the different elements, how you progress within the iLead, how it's evaluated and assessed, and the growing network that we have with the program and the plan for the students. So we do a lot of activities just to get people moving and thinking and really reflecting on their own leadership. This next one would be something you'd be working with in your group, where you would look at, you're really looking to see what your brain hemisphere dominance is, if you're right-brained or left-brained, and then how you deal with conflict management, and are you a leader or a manager? So looking at the symbols that represent you. And you would talk about your individual strengths and assets that you have. The first group would make a chart, or they could make any kind of picture, diagram, graphic organizer that captures their collective understanding of what leadership is, and they would define what a good leader is. Now, this can be a real fascinating type of exercise because everybody comes with different experiences and backgrounds and cultures. And so when they start talking about what a leader looks like, a leader could look very different in India versus the United States. A leader could look very different in China versus India. So you talk about those different ideas and theories around leadership behavior and what it is in today's world. The need for us to become more globalistic and have a global citizenry as we work with other leaders in our organizations. So the first group puts that together in some kind of, like I said, a chart. It can be a diagram, a graphic organizer, a picture. I am not an artist, so I would do some kind of stick figures, but it could be anything that you would imagine. And then another group would look at project-based learning and how students are going about, how different organizations are going about project-based learning. They could be projects you're working with within your company. It could be classroom projects. How does it impact your culture, and how are you going to grow it? I just recently went on a college visit up in Boston at Northeastern University, and they have a program now where students would take a term in classes, and then their next term would be a co-op where they're out working, so that they're really getting the understanding of what project-based learning looks like, and taking those classes that they've learned and reflect on what they've learned and apply it to those particular jobs in their co-ops. These are the types of tasks we would like to see as students are working together on these different warm-ups. And then you determine who's going to be the task manager, who's going to organize the group, what kinds of skills and experiences should a task manager have as they're putting this task together, and what roles would the rest of the group be playing? Is there someone that's going to be the time manager? Is there someone in the group that's got beautiful handwriting or can do great jobs with infographics? And then who's that person that has the oral presentation skills that could be talking with us and showing us what our group is represented, and how are we going to go about project-based learning or looking at the different experiences within leadership. And then you agree to how much time the group would need. Each group has different needs around time, so it's important that you check that out. And then the groups would report out. They could report out virtually through, like we have a webinar experience here. They could also be working with someone in the room while another person's giving the webinar. They could actually have an iLead trainer there with them and working alongside with them and sharing some of those reflections. And then as you can see, there are reflection questions. What do you need to know more about? How comfortable are you with teaching other students about leadership? And how comfortable are you with project-based learning? And how is this activity similar to how iLead will be, which you'd be learning about? And then you were given some kind of article about leadership, and you'd highlight anything you want to share with the group. You'd star certain passages around the article that you're reading that really speaks to you. And then you put an X around something that you disagree with in the article, and you connect the article or concepts into what you're already doing within your group, and identify potential challenges you might have in implementing a PBL effectively. So iLead basically is all of these pieces. You'd really work on looking at leadership theory and application, working on those project-based pieces around learning, using a Myers-Briggs type personality assessment, which some of you may be familiar with and some may not. It's basically an assessment where you're put in different scenarios and you answer how you'd respond to those scenarios, and if you're sensitive, if you're not sensitive, if you can be judgmental around situations that you're put in, if you're non-judgmental. So there are different aspects around the Myers-Briggs, and the iLead program breaks it down. As well as you'd look at emotional intelligence, understanding, and application, how you would work with group and team dynamics, delaying immediate gratification, and then problem solving, looking at how you communicate and what you communicate, your style, and then your situational leadership. You know, you're put in different situations, and how do you respond as a leader through those situations? And your personal accountability within your job, within your club or organization. What pieces are you accountable for, and what are the other pieces that you put others into accountability roles? And then building consensus is always really important as a leader, that you try to work with your naysayers and how you go about working with those folks and bringing them along. And then your reflection. How do you go about constantly and consistently reflecting as you're working on your leadership skills? And looking at strategies. So this next slide shows you, to the right there's a picture of our first book, the iLead book, and that's the Stage 1 Novice Book. You see some students there working with different, they're working on a theory there around leadership. And so you want to look at, what do I, as I go into this training, what is it I want to learn? Because it's important that you give input into where you want to go on your pathway around leadership. And you may read an article, you may look at the website around iLead before you get involved, but then you want to look at how it would be implemented at your particular organization. So we're not going to take the 15 to 20 minutes to scan the book, because you might not even see it, but there are parts of it online that you can see examples from on our website. And you can, if you were in a group, they would get a book, they'd look through the book, jot down things that jump out at them, thoughts, questions, reactions, any kind of observations they've made, and they discuss within their group what it is, you know, what they're excited about or what they're looking forward to with the iLead program. So, excuse me, for the first novice year, you really focus on yourself. You'd want to reduce that leadership is around the I and your own ego, that you're really collectively looking at your group and your team dynamics. And you look at yourself, you look in the mirror. That's one of our mottos, that when things go wrong, you don't look out the window, you look at yourself and how you can make things better. You develop some leadership language that you're going to be working, and task processes as far as how you go about working on the different warm-up and exercises in the Novice Book. There are different ways that you would go about, and I just shared one of them with you. When you look at the article, that you're finding connections that you have with the article. You're finding parts of the article that you don't agree with, and then you're discussing them. That's a way to get everybody involved. It's not just one person speaking for the group, that everybody has to participate in the different exercises, and there's a time for everybody to share out. It's not just your strong oral presenters that want to speak out, but it's that you have everybody in the group speaking. And then laying the foundation around leadership skills, theories, behaviors, those pieces that really give you a foundation around your organization. What we find is a lot of organizations want to go back and revisit their vision and mission statements. They're not familiar with their own mission or vision, and so they're trying to figure out what it is they want to do to go about really building that and having every member of their organization familiar with what it means to be a part of that organization. And then looking throughout the progression of the iLead program, the 5 iLead leadership principles, and to work through the task and demonstrate growth as a leader, of course, and you're moving up the iLead leadership ladder. So in iLead stages 2 and 3, you've got stage 2 where you're an emerging leader, and that's the blue level. This is a blue book that we've put out, and that goes through levels 8 through 14. And then the third book, which right now we're in the stages of publishing, is called The Practicing Leader, and those are levels 15 through 21. These all build on leadership foundation and practices from the first book that you saw on that previous slide, the novice stage, and you expand into projects that are more of your choice. We have actually a group in Nigeria that are working on some big projects there around sustainability, and they're using the iLead program to go about their work. And so that's been amazing to watch because they've been making movies using the iLead practices and principles and sharing how they've gone about building sustainable gardens and looking at their watershed and how they're going to apply some of these practices and teach in various villages to other students about how they can use their water in a more thoughtful manner and how they can be building gardens and working with the vegetation there in Nigeria. So they've been using the first book, the stage 1 novice, and they've moved on to the emerging leader and growing other leaders in different localities. And these are just some examples of how you could use iLead. There's also businesses that partner with iLead groups, and they mentor, they find folks that'll mentor other leaders, so you're constantly building upon that leadership capacity. And we've also worked with coaches to work on the iLead, using iLead in athletics, which has been very valuable. So these are the 5 iLead leadership principles. Live a principle-driven life would be one. The second one, managing people and resources well. And third, building trust within others, super important. We also have created a shared vision and communicate out effectively, and then being passionate, motivated, and motivating. So what we do within these principles is we build upon all the pieces of these different principles, and you'll basically hear more about that. The specific behaviors that are associated with the 5 different principles, obviously, if you look back, looking at a principle-driven life, what are the principles you live by within your own life? Are you polite? I think of my own children, and what are some of the principles that I drive home with them that I think are important? And just yesterday, we were at a grocery store, and my daughter held a door open for a woman in a wheelchair, and so the woman was so appreciative and talked about, there are many kids out there that don't have these kinds of principles. What have you done to make your daughter do this? And I didn't even think about it. I mean, this is just something that we do in our day-to-day life, but how are you modeling those pieces? And then as you look at how you embed those 5 principles, how are they connected with leadership? What is it you're doing in your behavior with your leadership to continue to model those various principles? One of the things I talk about with leaders is always reply to an email within 24 hours. Or if someone calls you, you must be calling that person back within 24 hours. Those are leadership behaviors that you're modeling that you're an effective communicator. And so how do you go about that within your work? And then how can you and your leaders infuse the 5 principles within the rest of the school or your organization? How can you grow these different principles with your group? So you'd brainstorm some of the responses around these pieces. And then, of course, compare. One of the things we do is we break out into different groups because each group has different responses. And so it's always interesting to hear what kinds of responses you get from the different groups. Sometimes if you have a large group, you're going to break into more than 2 groups. It could be 3 or 4 groups. But how do you go about looking at these principles and the connections around leadership? And what are the most important principles that people see with their leadership responses? And then what can you as an iLead coach develop within these principles with your leaders? What is it you can grow with your group, and how can they respond within the setting of their organization? What are some ways that they see they can grow those pieces? And these are some examples. The first one is a principle-driven life, like I was sharing earlier. And it talks about modeling values and principles and standards set as a leader. What makes you a different leader from, the other leaders within your organization and outside of your organization? Can you lead others? And do you know how to redefine yourself as you operate? As you get feedback as a leader, it's very important that you are redefining yourself and you're making the changes to be that effective leader. And rather than focusing on the rules that leaders are adopting, what is it that you're framing your own behavior, your actions, decisions, and attitudes towards? And so there's some different bullet points there that demonstrate the character, the integrity, the actions you're going to take that are consistent with your values, that you're committed. How do you go about persevering something that's important? How you are accountable, and that you're humble, that you're learning from others. As a leader, you should be learning from others. You do not know it all, and that is very important. And that you're trustworthy, that you can show empathy and sympathy at times when it's needed and expected, that you know yourself when to be self-aware and what your weaknesses are. What are your strengths? How can you lead by your own principles? And the second principle, or second iLead principle, is to manage people and resources well. So these are pieces where you're really looking at the difference between leading and managing. That you're looking at how Stephen Covey put it, effective leadership is putting first things first. Effective management is discipline, carrying it out. So that relationship between looking at, as a leader, I'm doing the right things versus managing is doing things right. How are you going about the leadership? And then there's some different bullet points here on building great teams and resolving conflict, using the situational leadership and planning well. So these are all different pieces around that second iLead principle, managing people and resources well. And it's very important not to be egocentric or egotistical, that you're flexible, that you're showing your competency, but you're also making yourself vulnerable as a leader, and you're continuing to learn and address situations. The third iLead principle is building trust. I think this is one of the very, very most important pieces of the iLead principles. You've got to be honest. And at times being honest can be very difficult, but people will respect you when you are honest. And you can't be a great leader unless you give that honesty. So being consistent, building some empathy around situations, showing that you listen, that you are confident and competent, and that you continue to nurture relationships. Even those relationships that you may struggle with as a leader, how are you going about building those relationships? The fourth iLead principle, creating a shared vision and communicating it effectively. How do you go about your communication? The vision is the big picture, But the leader needs to be able to really show what that could look like and where you want your organization to go. So in order to have a vision as a leader, you need to know where you're planning to take your organization. What is it going to look like? And can you speak to that really well within your group? And so you're looking at the effective goals, establishing those goals, and you create a plan that's going to get you there. You know, oftentimes we see many, many leaders in organizations that they think they know where they want to take their organization, but the problem is they don't have a plan. They haven't sat down and made a plan to get to that vision and mission. And so part of the training we work on, or consulting that we do with organizations and schools, is to break that down for them. Break down month by month, what are you going to do to get to that goal that you have for your organization? So establishing those expectations, looking at both verbal and nonverbal communication skills, and going about having that clear vision. And then the last iLead principle is our fifth principle: be passionate, motivated, and motivating. You know, great leaders are often extremely passionate. You see that when in political campaigns. You see that with religious organizations, or even in athletes that are leading their teams. So great leaders show that inspiration, and they're able to inspire others through their own passion and working to nurture and develop that leadership with others. So how you go about energizing your team, believing in what you do and how you go about it, seeking to learn and understand first, connecting others, and constantly persevering, you know, keeping that end in mind. Where is it that you want to go with your organization? And developing leaders, taking those calculated risks. So this would be, excuse me, the part of the section around the novice stage that you'd be looking at. And there's 6 sections in the novice program. There are 20 different tasks you go about. And so you see these 6 sections here: introduction to your leadership and yourself. The second one, really important to teach others that you do what you love, and you'll never feel like it's work. The third section, learning about the various components of leadership, and that task that you do is basically an exercise that takes you through what it would look like to go about learning as a leader. And then the fourth, the 5 iLead principles. And the fifth, putting everything together. So you put 14 through 19, the steps of the various processes that you're working on. And then the end of the book there is wrapping things up as a novice. You move on to that stage 2 of emerging. So this is what the section of the front of the novice book looks like. And it just shows you the different types of activities and pieces you'd be looking at. And this is our iLead 21 pledge. And the pledge is right in your book. And you'd read through the pledge and talk about what that looks like. And it creates a sense, and I'll read the pledge to you. As an iLeader, I pledge to be engaged in all iLead activities, discussions, and tasks, work hard and be honest with myself and my team when I have not put in my best effort, approach all iLead tasks and activities with a positive outlook and good attitude, do my best all the time, admit when I have not worked at my full potential, listen carefully to feedback from my peers and iLead head coach, represent my iLead team with pride and respect within the school and community, encourage other iLeaders and help them any way I can, step outside of my comfort zone and try things that might be scary or difficult for me, be present physically and mentally, and practice my leadership skills regularly in other parts of my organization, my family, my community. And then understand that leading is not about being in charge and telling others what to do. Evaluate my skills, talents, and weaknesses honestly and work hard to improve myself when and where I can. Listen twice as much as I speak. and choose my words and gestures carefully so I communicate clearly and do not offend. Honor what is said in confidence by other iLeaders and not violate that trust. Not demean, make fun of, or devalue any other iLeaders, even if or when I disagree with them. And seriously examine my values, attitudes, behaviors, and choices, and take responsibility for all consequences that result from my actions. Follow through with commitments I make, both in and out of the iLead team, and use only appropriate language, symbols, writing pictures in the iLead team's activities, tasks, and computer site, not share, steal, fabricate, or destroy any iLead tokens. And we have a token, it's an economy that we work with in the iLead program. Some folks use this token system and others choose not to. It can really be a choice up to the iLead leader. So you look at these different tasks and look at the goals at the end of each section and develop what you want to do within your organization at the scope and sequence, explaining out your thinking and report out after you've looked at the 6 sections. Using iLead 21 as a tool, you are the coach, so you have that relationship with your organization, and you would modify what it is you want to do with the different task processes. Now, we showed you the get in the zone warm-up activity, the I think, so you're using the prior knowledge, the reflection on the gets, and then learning where it would take you. The I plan is part of getting into groups and establishing goals, steps, and timelines. The iLearn sections of the book are where you go into greater depth on skills and topics. The iLead is actually working and completing the task. And then the I reflect, or students reflect on personal leadership growth. So as you can see in this wheel, there are different sections that you work on and evaluate as a group as to how you're doing, how you yourself are doing, how you're working within your group, the different types of jobs you have with your group. And then, looking at your portfolio of leadership development, how are you evolving and developing as a leader? And looking at the different task evaluations and protocols. Then you would look at how you've assessed within your group, the different discussions that you're having as a group, how you're assessing one another. And those assessments can be qualitative around what people are seeing as far as the leadership skills that are evolving from the iLead program. And it can also be quantitative, where you're filling out surveys to look at those pieces and using this data to move the group forward. The iLead pledge that I just shared with you is a great way to revisit each time you're working on different components of the program. Are we keeping true to our pledge? So you really have to look at your own flexibility as an iLeader and decide, what are the different sections we want to work on. It can take more than a year to get through the iLead 21 book, the first novice section of the 3 different parts of the program. So some organizations think, well, we're going to get through this in 2 or 3 months. That's not the goal that we have. Again, it's really that you've got to look at your own organization and how you're going to be flexible about breaking out the different iLead principles and components of the program, and it should match what you're doing. So these are just some examples of a task, another activity. They would be given an activity. This is task 1. They'd highlight the words that they don't understand, underline what Covey, this particular task has Stephen Covey involved in it. And then the article is, what advice would you give youth who will become future leaders of tomorrow? And it talks about Covey using some of his habits in the book and sharing those pieces out. So the people involved in the iLead would go and read this article, underline the important points, draw their 2 roads in their life, okay? So they would look at the roads that they've taken and discuss some of their options they've had as they've gone through some of these different components of their own life. And in this particular task, students would be looking at what evidence do they have of their leadership, what are the different reflections, and they'd look at how they're going to go about using those teachable moments within their group with looking at leadership. And then look, is this valuable? Is this something we plan to do with other groups? The iLead network is, you can get onto our Ning, and that's where you look at your different profiles, and and then you go back. I want to show you an example of that very quickly here. The Ning is, this is our Ning that we use for iLead, and this particular Ning, as you can see, there are different members in here. There are different links and sites you can visit. We have videos in here, and organizations go in and customize their own pages. And then at the top, you've got different groups involved that sign up, the members. And resources is a big one that we use, where it breaks down all the different resources, and here it is broken down by the different principles. And you can go in looking at novice, emerging, and practicing. What are some of the questions you'd be asking? If we're in that novice section, the first section, we'd be looking at trying some of these different examples out and practicing the tasks. So these are just some of the pieces that you'd be working on. After you've been working with the program, you'd be asking questions of your students. It's really important that you're continuing to interact and get feedback. And then how can we help? How can you look at your students, your peers, the network, yourself, and your bigger team, your bigger parts of your organization? So these are our contacts. Dr. Steve Edwards began this program. He wrote the program with his wife, Rebecca. And like I said, he's gone out and done, he's consulted and led the program in many different types of organizations with companies, schools, athletic teams. And he's worked in the Middle East. He's worked in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, as well as in, he's just started an organization in several different organizations and schools in India, and he's worked in the US as well. And I myself am one of the consultants with iLead, and we work together out of the Edwards office in Alexandria. So at this time, I could turn over to any kinds of questions that people might be having at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Debra, for a very interesting presentations. Folks, we are open for the question and answer. You can either put your question in the chat box, or you can raise the hand icon available on your webinar console. So let me go straight ahead to Mr. Walid Murad. He has raised his hand. Mr. Walid Murad, I'm unmuting you. You can ask the question directly to Dr. Debra. Hello, Mr. Walid, are you there? I guess he's not here. Let me go to another question. We have another question, that is, how do you evaluate the impact of iLead?
So like I was sharing earlier, there are various assessments you can use. You can use qualitative, where you're going out and gathering information. It could be taking movies of different scenarios as the leaders develop their leadership skills. And give feedback to them. It could be through presentations, it could be through papers that they write. There are lots of different qualitative components. With the quantitative, there could be surveys. You know, the sky's the limit as far as assessment, and we've seen it in various forms, so it's very simple to do. There's also components in the back of the book that have different sections that you could be looking at assessing your own leadership skills.
Thank you, Dr. Debra. We have another one, and that is that has been asked by Mr. Ismail. And his question is, what is the difference between leader and manager?
Well, the difference between a leader and a manager A leader is going to really get to know their constituents, their people they're working with, and who they're leading. A manager would just go in and make decisions. The decisions at times could be based on the information they're given, but a leader would get to know the people that they're leading. Also, a leader is more self-reflective, and they look in the mirror at their own learning. They're constantly learning, and they're trying to decide how they're going to go about their leadership and how they're going to break it down. A manager is not necessarily a self-reflective type of person. They're going to go in and just make decisions based on what they know. A manager can be looked at more as egotistical in some regards, where a leader is going to be someone that distributes out different types of expectations and jobs and responsibilities and leadership skills, and they share those leadership skills, where a manager would just assign and just have people go about their jobs, whether they knew the job or not. They would be assigning things. So a leader is someone that's much more reflective.
Thank you, Dr. Debra. We have another one, and that is, how can iLead help me to become a stronger leader?
Well, I will say I have used iLead in several different scenarios, and I have found that people think they know everything they need to know about being a leader. And in this process, what I love about iLead is that it really gets folks to be extremely reflective through the process. And they, at times, will see intentional barriers, what I call intentional barriers, where their organization might have some barriers that they're not aware of, or they might not be leading their organization through those barriers in a problematic, thoughtful way. And the process has really helped some leaders go about looking at their organization and what are some things we've been trying to work on, and what are some things we've been avoiding that we really need to start taking an approach where we're going to lead others through. So I would say multi things here. The program helps a leader become better because they reflect on themselves as a leader. They learn more about others. They learn more about becoming a better listener. And I think that's extremely important as a leader to listen more. I think in the past, as we've grown leaders, we've thought that leaders are always the ones talking and leading, and that's not always the case, that a good leader is often a good listener.
Thank you, Dr. Debra. We have another one, and the question is, how do you make every employee in the organization a leader, but also control how the organization goes forward with no conflict?
Well, I guess it, of course, depends on the organization, but of course, not everybody can be a leader. But what can happen in an organization, if you take a group of people through iLead, there are people that learn they do have some leadership skills, and it could be in areas that you need leaders in. There are quiet leaders. There are leaders that are artistic leaders. You have leaders that can be excellent at presenting, but they're not good at art. So you look at your organization and you start finding out more about your people and their strengths through the iLead program. And that's a great question, because I want to be clear that the iLead program, it's not that you take every leader in your organization and you say, okay, we're going to go through this leadership program. You could take everyone in your organization, and they go through the iLead program and they realize that they do have some type of leadership skill. But everybody's leadership skill is not the same. We all have different skills within leadership. So it's important to focus on what people learn about themselves in their organization. Yes, I have worked with schools and organizations where everybody in the room thinks that they are a leader. And through this process, they've realized, you know what, I I lead well in certain areas, but I don't lead well in all areas. So the program breaks that down for others.
Thank you, Dr. Debra. We have another one from Ms. Fauziya, and the question is, what is the topmost clear sign of a great leader?
Oh, wow. Well, we use a lot of Stephen Covey's work, but I will say, and this is just me, Dr. Lane speaking, I think trust is one of the most important, that you have to build trust within a group of people you're leading or they will not follow. So if you're sharing your expectations and your vision and you're bringing people along, and those people that are having a difficult time following along, that you're garnering them with having some quiet conversations, meeting with them one-on-one, focusing on how to bring them along. And they might not agree, and that's okay. In organizations, we do have people that don't always agree. You need those naysayers, but that you've built the trust of those people through time and they will follow you, I think is really important. I would see trust as one of the most important pieces of leadership.
Thank you, Dr. Debra. We have another one. It is, are there any boundaries to iLead?
That's a great question. That sounds like a question Dr. Steve Edwards would ask. I would say the boundaries are ones that your organization would set up, that I see this as boundary lists. And I'll give you an example. My own son right now is doing an iLead program at an elementary school where he's leading some future leaders. And we have spent time together working on how he's working on his own plan, working with these students. There's certain components of the iLead program they need right away, and they need to grow those leadership skills in order to discover parts about themselves in the other parts of the Novice Book. So we have spent more time on certain leadership skills than others. If we were working with adults, and it would depend on the group, there might be other components of the novice stage that we would really put more time into. There really aren't boundaries. I mean, you can add or take away from the program what you'd like. It's extremely flexible, and that's what I love about the program.
Thank you, Dr. Debra. We have another one, and that is, in what ways can iLead make a contribution to our company?
Well, I think iLead could definitely make a huge contribution to your company, in that you're either growing a group of leaders or you're continuing to work with your current leaders. It could be both. And you're looking at the skill set that those folks have. You're measuring it. We have different assessments. Actually, Dr. Steve Edwards has on his website, it's called, we call it the ELI. It's an educational leadership inventory that we give to leaders that look at their own leadership, and it's what we call a 360. So you have people that work for you. You have your advisor, like your boss, that fills it out about you, the people that you also supervise, and then you also fill out a survey about your leadership. And so it gives you a 360-degree overview of where you see yourself, and does it align with where others see you. It's a great inventory, and I really, we use it with a lot of different companies and organizations and schools, so that there's a communication tool from the beginning to look at yourself as a leader, and what are some areas I could grow in, and what are my strengths, and even within those strengths, what can I grow within those strengths? Just because it's something that you're strong at, it still doesn't mean that you're the best at it. So how can I strengthen even my strengths?
Thank you, Dr. Debra. We have another one, and that is, what are the attributes a team leader must look for while selecting members for their team?
There are various components in the iLead book that talk about what you're looking for as you're building your team. You want to look at someone that's willing to grow and learn, that they're, that they're going to make themselves vulnerable to learn more about themselves and others, that they have a way of building trust with folks, that they live that principle-driven life that I was talking about, where they have high expectations for others and they hold people accountable. If you don't have those pieces in place, it's very hard to become a leader. In the iLead pledge that I was talking about earlier, it talks about those various components, and that the leadership extends to personal and professional roles that we play. So as workers, parents, children, teachers, students, the choice we make to live by those principles is how we find our voice as a leader. And it's really important that we're looking at that. And you know that you're full potential, that you're your best all the time, that you listen carefully to that feedback. And when you're looking for leaders, that they have, they're challenging themselves both mentally and physically. Often you see leaders who are taking good care of themselves. They're exercising, they're eating healthy, so they're that model for others. And that they're showing those different principles, both privately, out in the real world, in their job setting, as they're with their families, with their friends. You're seeing it everywhere.
Thank you, Dr. Debra. Folks, that brings us to the end of this webinar. Any concluding remarks from your side before we end this session, Dr. Debra?
Well, I wanted to thank everyone for joining us, and I hope that we hear from you. And feel free to reach out to me on my email at debbie@edwardsedservices.com. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Once again, I really want to thank you, Dr. Debra, on behalf of Gulf Business Network Training Centers for your valuable time and sharing valuable information with us. And thank you all of those who have attended this webinar. We are recording this webinar and it will be uploaded on our website. So please stay tuned to webinar.gbntc.com for updates and for downloading the soft copy of this presentation. With that, I'd like to end this webinar and you all will be automatically dismissed once the session ends. Thank you very much and you all have a good day. Thank you, Dr. Debra, for your time and for a lovely presentation.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.